Hello, my name is Jana and I'll be talking about the global health issue of depression in Egypt, Ukraine, and the US. Let's define depression. Depression is often described as a mental disorder that is said to affect 5% of adults globally. Counting all the recorded cases of diagnosed depression this year alone, Ukraine ranks number one worldwide. The US is a close second, and Egypt falls somewhere around rank 162nd. In Egypt, it was found depression rates from the end of 2019 through midway through 2020 had risen about 10%. While specific rates of depression are a little harder to track in Ukraine than the other two states because of their current conflicts and how mental health stigmas factor into their history, I was able to find that from 2018 to now, it looks like the depression rates have risen about 15.1%. Here I have the rates of depression in the US from 2015 to 2019. As you can see, like both Ukraine and Egypt, it is also on the rise, though not nearly as steep as Ukraine. Globally, the depression rate has risen about 22% after the pandemic. Depression rates as a whole are on the rise for a number of reasons, from stigmas around mental health making it hard to get treated, to current and future world events looming and just creating anxiety and weighing heavy on the minds of many. Massive, more localized problem to the Ukraine war, which doesn't just affect the people directly involved mentally. Things like that globally will mess with people's mind. Just knowing that sort of thing is going on, no matter how far, tends to weigh pretty heavy to the COVID-19 virus, which filled with many with anxiety and worry and stress with what a sickness like that could do to them and their family, and the isolation that came along with it in an attempt to stem the illness. The pandemic also led to a lot of depression and anxiety in a lot of people. Alongside the bigger, more global problems, things like poverty and how you're brought up as a child can affect what kind of things you develop into adulthood, whether you have a mental illness, what kind of mental illness,
as of 2017,
20% of people living in Egypt do so below the poverty line, which is rather high. It is the highest of the three countries that I'm talking about. Ukraine is much lower with 0.6%, and the US sits around 1.5%. It's lower, but that doesn't mean that's not a contributing factor to the rising depression rates. As of right now, all three countries are taking strides to try and lower the depression rate. They are all taking slightly different approaches. Although the approach is slightly different, Ukraine and the US are both taking similar preventative action approaches, whether Egypt is taking a more mitigative action. What Egypt is doing to fight depression as it happens. Looks like to get ahead in 2020, Egypt started putting together a few different task forces, specially trained to deal with specific parts of the mental health crisis linked to the pandemic, alongside areas they dubbed quarantine hospitals, which were hospitals specifically catered to taking care of both the physical and mental drawback of COVID-19, to not only stem the disease but give the wider community more peace of mind when concerned with the disease. Like I mentioned, Ukraine took a more preventative course of action. Instead of inputting new systems like Egypt did, they went ahead and buffed their old systems like the US. They strengthened emergency response systems, expanding upon community also took a preventative and mental crisis. Unlike Ukraine, they services significantly more thorough with it. Similarly to Egypt, while they did throw together a few new program systems, like Egypt, they mainly focused on strengthening the old ones. To sum up the main points on what each country is doing to prevent or mitigate the damages of depression as the rates rise, it looks like both Egypt and America did nearly a complete rebrand of their mental health facilities. While Egypt focused on putting new systems in place, the US focused on buffing their old systems and putting a few new ones to add to what they already had. Ukraine mostly focused on bolstering what was already there. Both Egypt and Ukraine have systems that allow for citizens to benefit from free public healthcare, meaning that it should be easier to get treated for mental illness there.